Welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Mick West. Today's episode is an interview with Stian Arensen. It's a long episode. In fact, it's so long I chopped it into two parts, both about an hour long. You're going to need a little bit of background information here. Stian used to be a 9/11 truther. 9/11 Truth is a movement that holds that the World Trade Center was destroyed by controlled demolition and not simply the impact from the planes. They think that there were explosives pre-planted in the buildings. There's a couple of things that we reference whilst talking that you might not be familiar with, one of which is Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which is an organization of some architects and engineers who believe this particular conspiracy theory. They're a very small number out of the hundreds of thousands of architects and engineers in the country, or the millions throughout the world. But there are certainly some people who believe it, and they are architects and engineers. Another thing that we mention is the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth, which is a related organization. And they have been suing a bunch of people recently. They've been suing the FBI, suing the government, suing a variety of other people. The Lawyers Committee is basically a subgroup of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. They're very closely related. Now, one thing that comes up is iron microspheres. Iron microspheres is a particular piece of evidence that architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth like to use because they think it proves that a certain type of explosive was used during the collapse of the World Trade Center. So here we go with Stian Arensen. Stian, you and I met virtually around 2 years ago on Facebook. I think you messaged me after seeing me on Joe Rogan, is that right?
Yes, that's right. I saw you and Joe discussing, several conspiracy theories, but I guess 9/11 was the one that made me get in touch with you.
Now, at that time you were, and perhaps still are, very interested in the 9/11 conspiracy theory. How would you describe where you were at that time when you contacted me? What were you thinking about in terms of 9/11?
At that time, I was really deeply into the whole aspect of the 9/11 Truth movement in regards to the theory of nanothermite, explosives, basically the idea of the whole event being staged for the purpose of exploiting it, of course, for either financial, egotistical reasons for big corporations or perhaps something else than that. But I guess it was in the comment section of the community where I saw you getting in touch with people in a different way that I've seen before. You didn't call people names, and you didn't approach them in an unpolite way. And the response in return from other truthers and I guess other members of that community was what surprised me, to say the least. It was almost like someone reacting to having a religious perception threatened in a way. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that before from both family-wise and in other areas. And they get very defensive about it, and it gets personal for people. But you didn't stop, and I guess that's what caught my attention.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't actually realize it was exactly like that when you started talking to me. Because a lot of people, they just will contact me and they will say things like, what do you think about this piece of evidence? Or, how can you live with yourself being a shill for the government? Which I'm not. But yeah, I've really enjoyed our conversations over the last year and a bit, nearly 2 years, I think, because we've kind of covered a lot of ground. And I got the sense at the start that you were, you gave a lot of credulity to architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth's position that it was some kind of controlled demolition. What would you say as a relationship with architects and engineers and 9/11 Truth and your perception of them? How has that evolved over the last couple of years?
It's in a way twofold. Well, just to answer the previous comment, I was one of those people. Well, I did literally call you up and tell you, or ask you what the hell did you. How could you talk about it in this way and not talk about that? And
you were very polite.
But, well, yes, thank you. You were very grounded about it in a way. You were really consistent about what was your goal in saying what you said, and from what I perceived, your intentions are good, but it's easy for others to interpret them as you being a shill or anything else. In regards to the 8911 community, it's a twofold community in my eyes. There are people who have been living in an echo chamber for quite some time, where they don't actively expose themselves to criticism. It seems to be mostly based on emails and reading forum posts and perhaps watching a YouTube video where it says debunked. And I don't think that really connects to them. I think that they support themselves on each other. And this has been spiraling for quite a while. But then I feel that there's a section of that community which is a lot more serious, and they are open to having discussions and debates. But I don't know if there's anyone who's pushing them to do it. If there's anyone that is going to... Well, it also seems like there's a stigma attached to even talking to you, with them being part of that community. So it's almost like you get shamed for talking to someone who's challenging your opinions. Just for example, today I had a chat with one of the guys who I don't know if I can tell you after the podcast, but one of the people who's going to be peer reviewing the Alaska report. Mm-hmm. And he would be, for example, very glad to talk to you and to discuss at least the report when it comes out and other aspects of the 9/11 theories, so to speak.
Just to very quickly jump in, just to clear up for people who are not familiar with what the Alaska report is. This is a report that is was a study that was done at the University of Alaska Fairbanks by Dr. Leroy Halsey and a couple of his graduate students. And it was paid for by Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And it was a study into the causes of the collapse of World Trade Center 7. Yeah.
I see the community of AE 9/11 as a not a divided group, but it's yes, it's like an echo chamber effect. You just get people who don't expose themselves to, for example, the ideas that you have presented, and some of them have, but they don't grow on them. They don't continue to debate or to participate in that interaction, and I don't know why.
Yes, it is interesting that it's very hard to get through to people, and I see things that, I personally would consider to have been debunked, and yet I see them coming up again, not just on Facebook posts, but on fairly serious things, like the Lawyers Committee. They've done a number of lawsuits recently, and I think the one they did against the FBI had a quote in it saying that the presence of iron microspheres can only be explained by thermite, essentially, a thermitic reaction of some sort. And yet, like a few months before that, maybe quite a bit more before that, I can't remember exactly, I'd done this whole video and a talk I gave on how there's 10 different ways you can make iron microspheres, and you make them from, just from building construction and the building cleanup, and the fires would make some, and there's all these different types of possible sources of them. And yet they still had this very, very simple and misleading and essentially false statement in the middle of this lawsuit. And the lawsuit itself seemed to me, I don't know if you're familiar with it, if you read it, but it seemed like just kind of the same old things that have been said for a long time. It doesn't seem like they're refining things at all.
Most of the ideas are pretty, consistent with past thoughts and theories. But the lecture that you've done and the videos, I'm not sure if they've been exposed to them.
Yeah, that's
If you,
the problem. How
so
do you?
it's yeah. Well, it almost seems like a diplomatic, or like you'd need a diplomat to
Mm,
initiate something like that, because the emotional aspect of being wrong, and so badly wrong, and maybe not even wrong. I mean, just to, for example, I watched the lecture that you did on that, and as you say, there's several reasons as to why the microspheres can be there, and all of these other ways that we've observed them being there are, just part of a spectrum of reasons, and in that spectrum, nanothermite, I guess,
hmm
could be one of them,
Yeah.
and that it doesn't exactly discount it in any way. It just opens up other possibilities, and it's important, as you say, that they don't to say something like that it's the only reason those fears can be there. They're basically ruining the whole possibility of maybe granting a new investigation, because I do believe that there should be a new investigation, whether it's into microspheres or explosives or whatever it is. I think that there should be a new investigation in regards to who was actually financing it or making it happen, or did
hmm
someone make it easier for it to happen? And in that case, who? And if those people exist and are still alive today, then of course they should be brought to justice. Otherwise, they could play the same cards again another time or in a different way. That, as a speculation. But yes, to become fixed on that idea that the microspheres are just that, and there for that reason, I think is a mistake. Yes.
Yeah, something I always say when talking about why I debunk conspiracy theories is that the more extreme conspiracy theories that people believe in prevent them from looking at things that are less extreme. And
Mm,
eventually you're going to get down to things which are actual real conspiracies. But if they're
mm,
way off, like talking about holographic planes flying into the towers, or chemtrails, or flat Earth, or something like that, you really
mm,
don't have any hope of getting them to look at the real conspiracies. Wherever that lays on the conspiracy spectrum. I mean, maybe it's a bit further along than I think, or maybe it's a bit further down than you think.
mm.
But yeah, it's a distraction, and I think pushing everybody to a more reasonable state is good for everybody, regardless of your position.
If I can ask you, you said something in that lecture that that I'm not sure what you actually meant, but you said
Mm.
that you didn't want future generations to believe in conspiracy theories. Do you mean that? In what way do you mean that?
Actually, I was kind of, in a way, referring to something you told me at that point in the lecture. I was referring to a story that I remember you telling me, how you heard of two military people from your army. You're doing their national service, coming back from wherever they were stationed, and telling
Mm,
you about how they believe in this evidence for the thermite in the World Trade Center, the World Trade
mhm.
Center attacks. And that's something that's always stuck with me ever since you told me that. I think it was when we were actually voice chatting that one time.
Yeah.
And I combined that with an anecdote about how I had been listening to a podcast, which was a couple of kids, basically. They were like 15 or 16 years old, and they were talking about conspiracy theories. And so when I said, I don't want the next generation believing in conspiracy theories, I said, I don't want former soldiers believing in conspiracy theories, and I don't want the next generation believing in conspiracy theories. What I was really referring to there was, first of all, I didn't want disaffected soldiers blowing things up because they had some mistaken belief about conspiracy theory, like Timothy McVeigh blew up the
Mm,
Oklahoma building. I think he had some military experience, and
mm,
he got into conspiracy theories.
mm,
I think it's dangerous if you're in a situation where you have lots of people with military experience who have nothing else to do, and they start getting into conspiracy theories. And the Next Generation quote was really just talking about young people. Young people, being the next generation, if they're getting into these conspiracy theories at a young age, then they're going to grow up believing in conspiracy theories, and we're going to get this false conspiracy theories and these extreme conspiracy theories, and we'll get this kind of corrupting influence in society where more and more people start taking these conspiracy theories seriously. So I wasn't saying, everybody who's born from this point on should not believe in conspiracy theories. Okay. I promote like a healthy skepticism of the government, and that includes to a degree suspecting conspiracies in them. But I think that the young people is something that we want to focus on because they are at risk, and there's a lot of them. That's what I meant by that.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds a little bit better. I was thinking what you were referring to there. Yeah.
How did you personally start getting into conspiracy theories in general, and then specifically 9/11?
It actually did begin just like you said. It started off as really young. I must have been 6 or 7 years old.
Wow.
And I remember my dad. He was really involved in research as a hobby in the famous Hessdalen phenomenon. There's a valley in Norway where there's a light phenomenon. And it's been going on for quite a few years now. And he was deep into this, and it's a real phenomenon, of course. And they have a research station up there now that's state-financed, surveillancing the whole valley 24/7. And the university has been connected to it now, so you can study physics and get what's it called in English? You basically spend a few weeks out in the field. Trying to catch a glimpse and document this phenomenon, and it's been quite successful. But from his interest into that, he there's of course an interest then in UFOs. So I picked up a book about UFOs when I was 6 or 7, and from there it just spiraled on. Remember the movie E.T. and Independence Day, and there was just something about that mystery of something out there that just grasped my interest in it for a long time. Seeing a strange light phenomenon at 14 years old later just kicked it. Really, it really grew at that point, seeing something myself. And from there, I think it was loose change that started that whole way of thinking. And the way that loose change was put together was really in a way, a masterpiece. It's so well put together for a mind that's vulnerable and open, and if you're into music and strong, visual demonstrations of what's going on, and that whoever made that, I can't remember the names of who made it, but they did a really good job, regardless of how factually based it was, or how good the arguments were. But it sold the case very early on, and at that point, I think right after that must have been when Architects and Engineers were formed, and been paying attention to it ever since. But it started with UFOs, actually, so it's tipped over to something else.
Yeah, well, I think my personal interest also started with UFOs. I was very interested in things like that when I was young. I subscribed to a magazine in Britain called The Unexplained, and then later 14 Times. So I was always very interested in that type of phenomena. But more later, it was an interest in kind of explaining what you were seeing in the sky. I still don't discount the possibility of there being alien spaceships, but I haven't really seen any particularly good evidence that they're anything other than a variety of conventional explanations. Are you still interested in UFOs?
Well, since I've got you here, I'll show you a book that I'm reading at the moment. You might have read it. I'm not sure if you can read that. Is it inverted
yeah, Hynek.
or?
I see it. Yeah, I haven't read it though.
UFO
I've heard of it.
It's really good.
Yeah.
It's quite a read, and having him being the chief scientist from that, having him being a skeptic original. Well, he was still being a skeptic, but a denier in a way. He was just taking it as no, there's nothing here. And after that, admitting that the whole Project Blue Book was basically a project to calm down the masses, since they had no idea what was actually going on, and people were becoming hysterical.
Yeah, it's interesting the connection between UFOs and conspiracy theories, because UFOs essentially is a conspiracy theory in a way in that it requires the government to be covering up the presence of aliens. And of course, there's various levels of it. There could just be a simple, we don't know what these things are, so let's not talk about them. Or there could be a more involved thing where they have contact with the Greys and there's underground bases, or even like transdimensional wormholes and things like that. So people do believe in these things. I think some people question whether should you have UFOs on your chart of conspiracies, but I think because it necessitates a conspiracy, it's a conspiracy theory to a certain the cover up aspect of it is a conspiracy theory.
Yes, yeah, but that the first aspect of it that you mentioned, that this is something that we don't know what is, and we have no idea what's going on, I think is a more likely one. That that'd be more understandable if you're basically the representatives of whatever power there is in a society, and you can do nothing about what's going on. Then I think you'd rather cover it up and not talk about it, maybe, than acknowledge that there's something going on. But,
do you see any parallels amongst people you've talked to in terms of like UFOs and 9/11? Do you see some crossover between the communities at all?
In behavior, definitely. Not just behavior, but I guess topics. It's sort of a soup of people that they swim in like a glass of conspiracy theories, and they touch them all, and then you find people that are, of course, dedicated to one certain theory, or it could be a factual conspiracy. It could be WikiLeaks, or it could be something else. But my feeling is that this is a group of people that move from subject to subject. Sometimes it's UFOs, sometimes it's 9/11. And then it's over to moon bases or stuff like that. But it's the behavior of these people. I was studying the crop circle phenomenon in the UK for quite a few years. A couple of years ago, ending up making my own crop circle, ending that story.
Sounded like fun.
Yeah, it was indeed.
Did you do it in the middle of the night, or was it?
Yes, using night vision optics and some other stuff.
Did you do that to actually test to see if it's plausible, personally, and figure it out? Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
Well, I'm open to the possibility of there being a phenomenon previously that could have been separate. I'm open to that, because in this crop circle community, you have different groups of artists, maybe 5 or 6 different groups. One might be from London, another one from Liverpool, and they all gather during the summer in Wiltshire, and some of them are in contact with each other, and they sort of compete. And they're sitting around just like almost stereotypical, near pubs and having a pint, and they go out and smoke some weed, and they have a lot of fun. And then they watch these people go bananas when they go into crop circles afterwards, and they see helicopters and they camera crews, and they do really get a laugh out of it, and a lot of fun too. But they do acknowledge that there are crop circles where nobody knows who made it. Every season, actually, that there are crop circles that are really, really good, and nobody has any idea who made it. And these groups have been in contact with each other saying, do you guys make this? This is beautiful. But nobody knows who made it, basically. But between the 70s and 80s, there was quite a lot of crop circles that nobody has any clue who made, which is interesting, but it doesn't really get you anywhere. But there's been witness reports of these people, when they've gone out making the crop circles, seeing strange phenomenon themselves, like balls of light and these types of things, but no gray aliens running around.
Yeah, I think with the crop circles, it's obviously quite possible it's just someone who prefers to remain anonymous, and they enjoy the notoriety of being, the dark crop circle maker or whoever he is, the phantom. What are they called? Seriologists?
Probably.
I think it is seriologists. The people who study crop circles. That might be just kind of a jokey thing. I actually have had crop circles in my field out back here. I've got like a small field behind the house, and when the grass gets long enough, the deer come along and they kind of walk around in circles in it, and they're not very good crop circles. But no. I can see how something like that could get started, because when I'm walking through my field and I see this kind of area that's kind of got the grass kind of swirled around in a direction, it's not perfectly circular or anything, but it seems like it could occasionally go into a perfect circle, and if the crops were just a bit different, you could imagine a natural, real simple crop circle like that happening. Yeah. And then the guy goes to the pub and tells his mates, and they have a few drinks, and then they go and have a look at it, and then they're like, whoa, look at this amazing thing, it must be a UFO, and it just grows from there, obviously, and then people start making them, and it gets even more.
Yeah, it could have. Definitely. Yeah. But there are really interesting exceptions, though, back to, what was it, the 1940s and 50s, where these circles have appeared, and but they were really simple in design. They weren't that complex as they are today. And but what has happened in the crop circle community is very much alike what has happened in the 9/11 community as well, in a social way. Because what happened is that the believers, basically traveling from all over the world to walk in this phenomenon and to feel the energies, so to speak, they hate the people that claim that this is actually man-made. And then you have an interesting group of people that does travel to the UK and are into the spiritual aspect of it. When you bring up the fact and it may be evidence that these are man-made, they'll say that, well, maybe they are man-made, but maybe it's God working through them, or maybe it's right. So they always find a new way to use it to feel good about themselves, I'd say. I find the same behavior in both groups, but of course it's completely different subjects, and there are completely different questions to ask in regards to the events of 9/11 and crop circles. But the social behavior seems to be the same. And what has happened is that the intensity from the believers has grown so strong over the years that a lot of these circle makers have quit because they've been harassed and threatened, and there's been some lawsuits going around. I know that 3 other ones that I knew have quit and are doing sand circles instead. One of them is quite famous now. His name is Julian, but I can't remember his surname. But he did a lot of the most advanced circles, and when he quit, the really good ones disappeared, and they showed up on the beaches of Dorset instead. So
I remember people would go to these crop circles and they would try to get evidence, which kind of reminds me of people going to 9/11 dust and trying to get evidence from that. And I remember they actually found iron microspheres in crop circles, which I believe the source of them was probably micrometeorites, because there's actually quite a constant dusting of micrometeorites that falls on the Earth, pretty much constantly. if you take a magnet and you just go through some dirt, you will find them. And it's actually best if you do it like on a rooftop or something like that. But you can find them in dirt. And so they found iron microspheres, and then they said these iron microspheres can only have come from some kind of advanced propulsion engine. Therefore, these iron microspheres are proof of crop circles. Which it sounds kind of silly, and people might say I'm just bringing up that example to belittle the iron microspheres, but really it is the same thing.
Yeah, it is.
If you look in places, you look anywhere on the world, you're going to find iron microspheres because they're basically falling out of the sky, and every construction project will make billions of them. So they're all over the place. The brakes on your car spew off a few if you brake too hard, and they're just like. They're everywhere.
That's quite interesting.
People are searching for evidence, so they will find evidence, like with the crop circles. The stalks of the wheat or whatever is supposedly bent in a certain way, and that reminds me of on 9/11 you have these columns that are cut off at a certain angle, and even though there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for both things, the stalks were bent because the guys were pushing them over with a board or whatever they used, and the columns were cut during cleanup, and they cut them at an angle so they would fall in one direction and not the other. People still cling on to these things. Like, I'm sure if you look in the crop circle community now, you will find a lot of people still using this the angle of the wheat as evidence, and you still you see people using these angle cut columns as evidence. And there's that one in particular where I tracked down the photograph of it still standing and uncut from like 6 weeks after, and they still use the same debunked stuff like we were talking about earlier. It's very, I don't know about frustrating, but it's very what do you do? How do you get through to these people?
Well, so far my experience is that the only reasonable way to do it is through diplomacy in a understandable, and it's hard to be too nice to them as well, because if you get too nice with them, you lose them. They go straight back to believing whatever they want to believe, which is of course their right to do, and mine and yours as well. But it's like a fine balance. You need to be a little bit rough, and you need to be a little bit nice, and you need to find a really social balance to break through to these people. But in regards to the crop circles, when the crop circle phenomenon died out, which it did quite a bit in 2012 or 11, that's when it died quite a bit off, when most of these artists quit. You saw people remove themselves from the crop circle phenomenon, and they switched over to what's it called, ley lines, and these so-called energy blood veins of planet Earth. So these areas where people used to be, which I love the fact that they did this, and I joined them for quite a few nights, just sky watching. You had car parks around Wiltshire just packed with people with binoculars and night vision, and they wanted to see UFOs making crop circles, and you had campfires, and you had in a way a community that was very nice, very well-meaning. They didn't do any harm to any people at all. When they lost that, they just moved to the ley lines community, or the sort of this shamanic culture that's over in the UK. So they just spread off, and it seems to be, to me, a need to believe in something bigger than yourself. I have a feeling that some people do actually go crazy if they don't have a mental support that can carry them through life, because life can be rough, really rough for a lot of people. I mean, for most people, it's just about bringing food on your table and having enough for your kids to manage. And in that roughness, I think a religious aspect in any direction will help you accomplish that in a way that makes you feel good about yourself. And if that is believing in crop circles or thinking there's bases on the moon, then I completely understand it. It's a part of human culture and human nature for a long time, and it's probably going to continue for a long time. But I guess you're more into what happens when it becomes damaging, and when is that point? When is it that it becomes a threat? Like these soldiers that come home and really believe in this and that. I mean, there's quite a bit of other soldiers that come back home, and they're not pissed at the government for conspiracies necessarily, but for sending them off to a war that's bullshit, to put it in that way. And they so I don't find that conspiracy theories would be the threatening aspect of this. I think that the government's making decisions that traumatize people, and where they discover that they've been lied to, is a lot more dangerous than believing that someone else did 9/11, for example.
Yeah, I think perhaps the conspiracy theories there might be more of an issue on the individual basis, that rather than a general societal dissatisfaction. In America, we have former military and former law enforcement, like police. Quite a chunk of them kind of joined biker gangs. A lot of the people who are in bikers are usually older guys who used to be in the military, or they sometimes were in the police, and they're just essentially rebelling against society. There's all kinds of different biker gangs. I don't want to cast all bikers in the same light, but there are these bikers and militias in the United States, which I think form in part, lots of different reasons, obviously, but because of that, what you talk about there, the dissatisfaction with the government sending them off to war, like an unjust war, that when they got to the country, they realized was unjust. Perhaps they realized before, or maybe they realized when they got back, but they realized at some point that they have been used, and perhaps they were forced to kill people over there, and then they came back and they have to fit in with society. And I think perhaps you're right. It might not be the conspiracy theory might not be the general threat there, but certainly it does raise its head. I just want to touch on something you mentioned earlier. You talked about these people in UFO watching parties having a great time, and then moving over to the ley lines. And I imagine they have some gatherings that they do at Glastonbury Tour or wherever.
Yes, that's the place.
Yeah, and I think you say having a belief in something gives you this a sense of order in the universe, but I think the social aspect is a major factor. You get this social life from having this shared passion, and I think this is something that I see, not just in UFO culture. They all like talking about UFOs. They have UFO conferences, but in 9/11, you get these local 9/11 groups and local chemtrail groups, and you get these groups of people, and they form a family in a way, and they get together and they have fun and they help each other. And I think, and you should tell me what you think here, that being part of a family prevents you from getting out. If you start thinking, negative thoughts about a theory, maybe 9/11 wasn't a controlled demolition, or maybe these UFOs are just, maybe crop circles are just guys with boards, then the idea that you're going to lose your family, your new family might dissuade you from even investigating that. Is that something you've seen or thought about?
Oh, I've experienced it several times. The first time was if you know about a group called SETI and Disclosure Project that was funded by Stephen Greer.
Well, I know SETI, and I know Stephen Greer, but I'm not familiar with this project. Stephen Greer is a UFO guy, isn't he? He thinks that there's aliens, contact, and things like that.
He funded he funded several organizations, but he funded one called SETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, in I think it was in the 90s. And he was in the UK in 2011, I think. I might be wrong about that, but it was in Melksham, and they were funding a new organization, a sister organization for him, in the UK to basically do the same thing as Sea City was, and that is to go out, meditate, and to ask whatever is out there to come down and show itself, and to initiate contact with whatever's out there. And I was a part of that group for around 7 years as a technical consultant with photo cameras and binoculars and night vision gear and recording and everything, electromagnetic recordings and everything. I'd wanted to do the nuts and bolts stuff and not have so much to do with the spiritual aspect of it.
Right.
But when you noticed that there wasn't really much going on, and that what they were seeing were, iridium flare satellites, started asking questions about maybe what you felt or thought you felt, or what you saw maybe wasn't that. And it created some stir inside the community, and I was eventually excluded from the organization, which was called SERPER. The reason was, if I can remember how he put it, that my inner energy didn't synchronize with the group's energy.
Right.
So I was then...
You're a troublemaker.
Yes, and was then excluded. And it, of course, exactly how you put it, you feel excluded from a family, which is a family where you find an openness and inclusion that you don't find anywhere else. Because if you talk about this stuff in the normal society, so to speak, my experience was that in school, in family, usual friends, you were, ostracized or, pushed out there as well just for talking about it. But here is a group of people that are including me. The more I talk about this and the more I exaggerate my own stories, to put it like that, and they cherish it in a way. And it's like you're swimming in a sensation of love almost. You're so on the same level of a belief system and wanting to believe that. And it's hard to find that inclusion anywhere else. It also happened in the crop circle community. For example, I was very well connected with the crop circle researchers over there, like Ava Marie Breckester, Lucy Pringle, and one of Dr. Greer's personal friends. I can't remember his name right now, but it's many years ago. And as soon as I told them that I'd met with one of the circle makers, as soon as I told them that I'd met one of them, I was excluded.
Wow.
And the reaction from the researcher Ava Marie Breckester was that of anger and frustration. And I was there with a good friend of mine when this happened. He's a cameraman with the History Channel, previously BBC. He now works for the TV show Ancient Aliens. He started observing the same thing as me, that the more you ask questions about whatever these communities believe, they will exclude you. So it's almost like a double morale in all communities like this, because they claim to be excluded themselves from the beginning by normal people. And then they get into this community, but as soon as you become one of these normal people again, or maybe not normal, but just start asking fundamental questions, they're the ones excluding you. So they're doing exactly the same that they've experienced themselves. And this is what I saw, like when you were in these comment sections, that it is a type of exclusion, and it's to me that was personally painful in a way to watch at that time, because it just makes you angry as to how people can communicate with each other in that way. But yeah, that happened in the crop circle community, and now it Yes, it happened there as well. I've been connected with an artistic community here in Norway that do art pieces, and they're really good at it, and it's an amazing group of people. But as soon as you start doubting or asking questions about 9/11, that maybe it wasn't that bad, or maybe it wasn't explosives, maybe it was this instead, or maybe it was other people behind it, but they didn't use explosives. But as soon as you start approaching that, you kind of get the same sensation that they get of you, that you're a shill, or that you're been put, that you've gotten disinformation or something. And so I think you're right. Yes, there is a type of exclusion here, but that family inclusion, there's nothing quite like it, because it's so powerful. And I don't know what it's like in the skeptics community, if you guys get the same sensations of being skeptics together.
I don't think it's quite the same.
Okay. I wouldn't know.
There's a degree of community, I think, in any group of people with similar interests, but I don't think we have exactly the same. The conspiracy theorists think they're changing the world in a revolutionary manner, whereas skeptics are just kind of improving the world a little bit at a time. So I don't think you get the same type of thing. But it was fascinating, hearing you talking about being excluded there, because I don't know have you read my book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole?
No, I haven't read it yet.
Not the first chapter. The first interview I do in the book is with a guy called Steve, and his story there is around 9/11, but it really seemed to parallel what you were saying in I think it was the crop circle thing, or maybe the UFO thing. But basically, he had this real sense of family. And he even said there was lots of beautiful women in the group, so that was a positive thing as well. So it was like a dating opportunity as well. And he had a great time, and he was into UFOs, and he would get up in these 9/11 meetings, and he would give stirring speeches, and everyone would applaud him, and he felt like he was some kind of hero, and he really enjoyed it. And it took him asking questions for the spell to break, and it kind of happened when the group started getting interested in chemtrails, and that was just a step too far for him. He looked into chemtrails and discovered that they were just contrails. Brought it up, and then they told him basically what they told you, that his energy didn't mesh with the energy of the group, and so he would have to move on, and so he lost his family. Which I think was actually kind of hard for him. He went back to those groups more as a debunker, but I think in part it might have been because that was his family and he wanted to talk to them still. He's still actually friends with them. So it's very interesting parallels there. I should send you a copy of my book so you can read please. That. At this point in the discussion, we started talking about various aspects of 9/11, including a bunch of fairly technical aspects. So I've kind of cut that chunk out. It's about an hour long, and I'm just giving the end of our discussion here now. The chunk that I've cut out will be available in another episode.
Some of the arguments that you're bringing forward are very easily understandable, but I think some of them are also alternative explanations.
Yes.
And not exactly a debunk.
I agree.
So to speak.
I agree. And this is something that I would actually encourage that interpretation of it. But the point is, there is an alternative explanation. The point here is that there isn't just one possible source of whatever, or one possible reason for these things. There are other possible reasons. People say things like the presence of iron microspheres can only be explained by thermite, which isn't true. Or they will say, what the firefighters saw can only be explained by thermite, which also isn't true, because what they might have seen something that wasn't molten steel. You could say, like, this meteorite can only have formed from one thing, but there's an alternative explanation. It's just, crushed. So I give a narrative, and I don't prove it, but I present it as a possible alternative explanation, which I think, you can consider it. And I give, I'll give you the supporting evidence that I have, like the meteorite has unmelted steel in it, and it has bits of paper in it. And, and also concrete doesn't actually melt, really. It kind of like disintegrates into its components.
The language that's being used in this manner of debunking, so to speak, like in your lecture, you said a couple of times, just debunked, that whatever this is, it's debunked. And maybe the language is a little bit too monotone or just too you know what I mean. That it's.
I agree with you. And that's actually something I've tried to rectify to a degree in some of the shorter videos I've been doing recently, which I did after that presentation. Like, I will say at the end of a video that this doesn't prove that this is, but it's something else to consider. And I think now I really should almost like start out saying that, what I'm about to show you does not disprove the theory of controlled demolition, but it's something to consider, especially if you think that this aspect is evidence for controlled demolition. So, because people get very defensive when they think that you are trying to remove the underpinnings of their world, and they view something like me debunking iron microspheres as me attempting to disprove that 9/11 was controlled demolition. And so they fight against it with not just simply with the to preserve their belief in iron microspheres, but to preserve their belief in the entire 9/11 thing. So I really have to try to separate that out and say, all I'm doing is saying that there are other reasons for iron microspheres, one of which is thermite. I actually make iron microspheres with thermite in the talk I do, although I do also find these little white eyeball microspheres, which causes problems.
But there are people, in the debunking community, or for example on Metabunk, and people in the skeptic community that seem to take that they feel they're part of a team, and that team is debunking, and that team is to show, and almost like it's a fight to prove people that you've been debunked, or they put it in the end, it's debunked. It's like this. It's a way of communicating that almost like a self-loathing. You get a sensation of people almost getting high on themselves for appearing to be more intelligent or reflected than someone else, and it completely ruins the whole argument that they came with to begin with. And I see this very visibly in the skeptics community, that they're riding a high horse, many of them, and even if their arguments are sound, it doesn't really matter, because the way in which they're communicating it is basically just ruining it.
Yeah, no, it's a problem. And in my book, which I'll send you a copy, I talk about how the first thing you've got to do is establish effective communication. Like, if you're not communicating effectively with somebody, it's kind of pointless. And I think there's a lot of bad debunking being done by the skeptics community in two ways. One is kind of like the rush to judgment, where people will just make up the first explanation that comes into their head for things, and then tell you, oh, well, that's obviously it just collapsed because of the fires, and blah blah blah. They'll make up some explanation without really understanding the nuances, and so it doesn't really come across very well. And the other bad debunking is being, just like you say, being very dismissive and not really taking the time to understand what the other person is talking about. Just kind of a rush to judgment without really knowing the topics. And a lot of the times that backfires, especially in a more mature theory like 9/11, when a lot of the proponents, like yourself to a degree, you've been involved in it for a long time, and you know a lot of the arguments, and you might know more about it than the debunker. And then the debunker comes in, and you say something, and then they just say whatever comes into the top of their head. they don't take the time to listen to you and find out what the context is of what you're saying and why you believe what you believe. And so they end up like not debunking things because they will just offer very, very slight objections that don't really make sense because they don't really understand the context.
Yeah,
so it's a problem. I wish people wouldn't wade into to debunking things before they understood things. Like, a silly example, but flat Earth. There's a famous experiment in flat Earth where you measure the length of a shadow at one spot and then the length of a shadow at the other spot, and everyone says like, "Oh, this proves that the Earth is round." It doesn't, though. It just proves that that the sun has a different angle between these two sticks. It could mean that the sun is very low. So because this experiment doesn't prove it, and yet it's in popular culture, it's a way of proving the Earth is round. Then when someone is a bad debunker, they will often go for this weak argument and give it to a flat Earth believer, and then they'll just roll their eyes, and then it's kind of hard to have a discussion with that, because now you've got to explain to the debunker about all the math involved with the angles and everything, and you're not going to get anywhere. So take your time if you're a debunker.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question: what do you think has been the biggest learning experience for you doing all of this work? What has made the highest impression?
That's a good question, and I think it is kind of what related to what we're talking about there, in that you can't just explain something to someone and then expect them to change their mind, no matter how valid your explanation is. There's more to it than simply debunking, as in giving the correct explanation. It has to fit into a broader understanding of what the other person is about, what their entire worldview is. And you have to make sure that you are communicating effectively and that they understand what you are doing as well as you understand what they are doing, what they are saying, what their thought process is. So you have to take the time to actually establish communication before or during the actual debunking. I think before I was very focused on figuring out what was wrong and then writing an explanation of why it is wrong. But that doesn't really work, because I did that for chemtrails, like starting in 2006. And I've written all these explanations of why contrails can persist, and yet we still have all these people on the internet saying, "Oh, if it's a long contrail, it must be a chemtrail." So just having the explanations doesn't work. You can't just explain things to people, and even if you do it online in a chat room or something, you say, "Here's the explanation." They don't read it, or they look at it and they think it's disinformation, or it goes in one ear and out the other. So I've really changed in the way that now I focus more on communication and like outreach, like trying to talk to people. And this is partly why I'm doing this podcast. I want to talk to people who on all sides of the spectrum. I say you're slightly on the conspiracy side of the spectrum, which is great. So I actually thought you would be a bit more conspiratorial. Based on some of our, perhaps I was looking at our older interactions and not the more recent ones. Yeah. So 2 years ago, you were a bit more of a 9/11 truth. I mean, I think you obviously you're still very interested in figuring out exactly what happened, and you still have a lot of suspicions. So you're a good person to talk to, because I think seeing your journey in and out of the rabbit hole, I think, is a good illustration of what can happen, and it's not all bad.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
it's actually liberating.
If you're coming closer to the truth and you actually recognize that, then I think it's a good thing. You might have lost your crop circle family, but I'm sure you still have friends.
I do have a couple of them, actually. Yeah, we're going to try to make another one. But distancing yourself from the emotional aspect of believing in those theories is very liberating. It does help you see things more clearly, definitely.
Yeah, and I have heard that quite a lot. People, it's like the scales have been lifted from their eyes or whatever. They see things more clearly. I think for a lot of people, they labor under. They kind of know that it isn't real for a while, but they stay in it, and then there kind of becomes a tipping point. And so it can be, even though it takes a long time to get to that point, when it does fall away, it can fall away fairly rapidly, like the false aspects of your belief. Like I think you probably had suspicions and questions about various aspects of these various things, like all the things that you've been through, like the UFO people who made UFO appears, the crop circles, and then some aspects of 9/11. You have questions about it, but you still stick with it because that's what you believe. But then the weight of the evidence at some point makes whatever that aspect is fall away. I've heard that being described as being liberating, but also probably sometimes a bit distressing if it's a bit of a shift in your worldview.
Yeah, definitely is. It's so I can imagine that you're on a journey to find the holy grail of trying to communicate to different communities in the best way possible.
Yeah, I don't think there's a holy grail though. I say there's no silver bullets. I think it's very much tailored to the individual. Like what works for one person isn't going to work for another. There are certain things I think that do work well, like finding common ground, finding things that you actually agree on. Like I will often ask somebody like, "You don't think the Earth is flat?" Or you don't think the chemtrails are real, even though maybe they do. So we find, where's the dividing line between what we agree on? Like we would agree, for example, that Queen Elizabeth is not a child-eating reptile. Some people do think that. And then you go down the line and you say, what don't we agree on? And why are we disagreeing? Why do we agree on something that's just this further along the spectrum, but we don't agree with this thing? Why do we agree that no plane? Or why do we agree a plane hit the Pentagon, but we don't agree that on the controlled demolition? Why is one thing implausible and one plausible? So I like to look at that line.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a very interesting discussion. 2.25 hours. So
oh, really?
Yes, it's been very good. I think I might have to split it into two pieces.
All right.
So you get 2 episodes. Part 1 and Part 2 of Stian. So I'd like to thank you very much for taking this time, and maybe we'll have you on again when you've proceeded further.
I'd love to.
I think I'd like to talk to you again after the report comes out, the Halsey report from Alaska. So that would be very interesting because I think your take on that has been very interesting. And all right, well, thank you very much. I'm going to stop recording now. You've just listened to episode 3 of Tales from the Rabbit Hole. The extra material I cut out is going to be available as episode 4. And coming up next week in episode 5, we're going to talk to Dan, a former apocalyptic prepper who now is no longer an apocalyptic prepper. This is Mick West with Tales from the Rabbit Hole.